Today's limud is Haggadah Shel Pesach, and we are Be'ez Hashem holding at the 9th shir, Sei Ulemad Ma Bikesh Lovon Ha'arami Lasos Liyaakov Avinu. So, as an introduction to this part of the Haggadah, the Mishnah in Arvei Psachim, Daf Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph, when it's discussing the way one is Mekayim, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, says, V'doiresh me'arami oived avi ad sheyigmar kol ha'parsha kula. That it's critical for the Misaper to be doiresh, keyword, from Arami oived avi until the end of that parsha. In fact, the Rambam in his Yad Chazaka, when he talks about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Rambam includes this inyan that's mentioned in the Mishnah. V'hu sheyidrosh me'arami oived avi ad sheyigmar kol ha'parsha. Then the Rambam says, V'chol ha'moisef u'mayrech b'drash parsha zu harei ze meshubach. That if someone's going to be moisef and he's going to be marba in darshaning this parsha, the parsha of Arami oived avi, harei ze meshubach. The Rambam took the general idea that's mentioned in the Haggadah, Kol ha'marba l'saper b'tzias Mitzrayim harei ze meshubach, and he focused it on this prat in the laws of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's an inyan to be doiresh from Arami Oived Avi until the end of the parsha. Says the Rambam, it's in those droshes that Kol ha'moisef u'mayrech b'drash parsha zu harei ze meshubach. So, obviously, in order to understand this Mishnah and the Rambam, it is important to know what exactly the parsha of Arami Oived Avi is. So, the parsha of Arami Oived Avi is mentioned in the Torah. It's in Parshas Kisavai. It's in the context of the mitzvah of Bikur. So the Yidden were told, Ki Savai el haaretz asher Hashem Elokecha noisen lecha nachla b'yirishta v'yeshavta ba. When you're going to enter the land of Canaan, when you're going to enter Eretz Yisrael, and back in the day, we were all farmers. You're going to have a farm, and you're going to plant and cultivate certain peiros. There's a mitzvah to take the rashis, the first fruit to grow, not use it for yourself, but bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, give it to the kohen, some form of hakrava. And then the pasuk says that when you're going to go to the Beis HaMikdash and you're going to go bring this rashis bikurim to the kohen, you should make the following declaration: Va'anisa va'amarta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, Arami oived avi, vayered Mitzrayma, vayagra sham b'msei ma'at, vayihi sham l'goy gadol atzim v'rav. The way Rashi teaches this pasuk, Arami is referring to Lavan Harami, and he was oived avi. He tried killing my Zayda, Yaakov Avinu. Lavan and Yaakov had some tension between the two, and the pasuk says that Lavan actually tried killing Yaakov. Now, Arami Oived Avi sounds like he actually killed him. Rashi, quoting the Sifri, says that when it comes to a Rasha, Machshava Ra, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitzaref L'maisa, and that's why the pasuk makes it sound like it actually happened. But of course, Arami was never Oived Avi. Yaakov lived to tell the tale. But either way, you begin your declaration at the time that you're bringing the Bikurim by saying Arami Oived Avi, Vayered Mitzrayim, and ultimately Yaakov Avinu ended up in Mitzrayim. Now, that wasn't a direct result of Arami Oived Avi. That was a direct result of Mechiras Yosef and Vayihi Rav Ba'aretz and the dream of Paro. But we're fast forwarding to the fact that Yaakov Avinu eventually ended up in Mitzrayim. Vayagra Sham, he lived there as a foreigner. Vayagra is Miloshin Gerus. B'misei ma'at, and at the time he had a very small family. In fact, we know Yaakov Avinu, when he went to the land of Mitzrayim, was b'shivim nefesh. Vayihi sham l'goy gadol atzim v'rav. But like the pasuk says in the beginning of Parashat Shemos, when Yaakov Avinu was there, his 70 people turned into a nation that was gadol, it was atzum, and it was rav. Vayareu oisanu ha-mitzrim vaya'anunu. And when the Mitzrim saw that the Yidden became this great, powerful nation, they started torturing the Yidden. As a matter of fact, we went through the psukim in the beginning of Parashat Shmos and Chumash here in the Haggadah Shiurim. Really, the impetus for the superficial reason for why the Mitzrayim began to chepa with the Yidden was because Vayihi Sham the Goy Gadol Atzim V'Rav. And what they were trying to do was not so much annihilate the Jews. It wasn't so much genocide, but rather what they were trying to do was curb their growth. It was more the one-child policy. But either way, Vaya Anunu, they chepped the Yidden, Vayin Oleinu Avei Kasha, and they gave us and subjected us to very, very difficult work. So what we did was, we davened and we yelled to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayishma Hashem es keleinu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard our tefillos, Vayares onyenu, ve'esamolenu, ve'esachatzenu, and he saw all the challenges and all the difficulties that we were going through. Vayitzeinu Hashem miMitzrayim. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, biyot chazak u'vezroya netuya, with incredible force. Uve'meir gadol, u'ba'osos uve'moivsim, with spectacular miracles and moivsim. Vayivienu ala makom hazeh. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us to this land. Vayitein lanu es haaretz hazois. Eretz zovas cholu v'dvash. Va'ato, says the person bringing the bikurim. And now, hevesi es reishes priya adom Hashem osata li Hashem. After telling this incredible story around the world in a couple of psukim, says the person bringing the bikurim, I have now brought reishes priya adama v'hinachte l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. I'm placing it in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu by the mizbeach v'shtavis l'fnei Hashem Elokecha. And then the Torah says that this person had an obligation to bow down. He had an obligation to do hishtachava as well. These psukim are what we know as the parsha of Mikra Bikurim. Mikra Miloshin Megillah Nikras. Mikra Miloshin, declare. When the person brought his bikurim, he had to make the aforementioned declaration. Now, Pashup Shah, why exactly is the person bringing the bikurim telling this story? You have something to give me, shkoyach, I appreciate it. I'm going to send you a thank you card. I'm very, very makritay. You meet someone in the street, he starts telling you literally his whole life story. Feels a little socially awkward. But the reason is, and Chazal learned from here, the oimik in how a person has to be makir toiv. The yid is being makir toiv to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he has a field, and that he has peiros, and that he's healthy enough to be able to make the trip to go to the Makom HaMikdash, and he's able to bow down in front of the Shechina. He has a lot to be thankful for. When a yid is thankful, you're not only supposed to say, oh, thank you for giving me this opportunity. You're supposed to think of where you were, how your life could have been, and exactly how it played itself out. And that's why it's incumbent upon the yid to say that I'm in such a good place, but I recognize that it's only because of your chesed, because to be honest, Arami Oivedavi, to be honest, I was once in a situation where, my ancestors were slaves in Mitzrayim. V'ilu lo hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? We'd still be slaves in Mitzrayim. So this is a clinic in how a person is supposed to be makritay. But regardless, there are several psukim tucked away here in the beginning of Parshas Kisavai, dealing with the mitzvah of Bikurim, that talk about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Coming back to the Mishnah, says the Mishnah, Arbi Psachim, Kuf Tezayin Amar Aleph, V'deirish Me'erami Oivedavi, Ad Sheyigmer Kol HaParsha Kula. That part and parcel of the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim is to read these psukim, and not just read these psukim, V'deirish, you have to say the droshes, you have to learn all the limudin of these psukim. And it's from Arami Oivedavi, that's where it begins, until the end of the parsha. The Rambam added to that, and the Rambam says that when we talk about Kalam Marble Sapi B'tzias Mitzrayim Erez and Meshubach, it's Kalam Ma'isuf U'Meirich B'drash Parsha Zu Erez and Meshubach. It's all in the Parsha of Rami Yovedavi. So this Parsha of Rami Yovedavi until the end of the Parsha becomes so critical to the story of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's mentioned in the Mishnah as almost being ma'akiv on some level to Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Rambam holds Kalam Marble Sapi B'tzias Mitzrayim is referring dafka to this Parsha. So there's a few questions that the Kleine Kinderlich are about to ask. Number one, Mehechet Teisi, this is something that one is supposed to do. Where did Chazal know that? That's a Mishnah, it's a Rambam. For us, that's a Makar. But Arvach Arvitzarech, where did Chazal see? In all the different psukim that we know about, that tell the chiyuv of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, the 4 answers to the 4 questions, Where did Chazal see that you have to be Deirish Arami Ovedavi? In fact, the Rambam says that the Kolamar B'Lasaper B'Tzias Mitzrayim is referring to the drushes of Arami Ovedavi, Remeir Simcha, in Or Sameach. On this Rambam right here, in Hilchas Chamutz U'Matzah, Perek Zayin Halacha Daled, says we know that matzah is referred to in the Torah, it's in Parashas Re'eh, as lechem oini. And according to one man da'amar, there are many, but according to one, lechem oini means lechem sha'oinin olav dvarim harbe. This is Remeir Simcha, the lashon sha'oinin olav dvarim harbe. The lashon of oini is a little bit of an interesting lashon. I would say that it's the lechem shemagidin v'yigadet olavincha. It's the lechem zikaron, where you mekayim zachar, where you mekayim lamantiskers, you're in Seischam Eretz Mitzrayim. What did Chazal want by using that very interesting word of oini? So Rameh Simcha says, I believe that's where Chazal realized that this is a reference to the parsha of Aram Yovedavi. It's a reference to the parsha of Mikra Bikurim, because the way the Torah commands the person bringing the Bikurim to recite the Mikra Bikurim is Va'onisa v'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha. Va'onisa lechem oini zok Rameh Simcha v'zebor. This is how Chazal knew that the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim is somehow gebindin with the parsha of Aram Yovedavi, and that's why you maschel from the words Aram Yovedavi, because the lechem oini olav dvarim harbe va'onisa va'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha. What are you supposed to say, Aram Yovedavi? And that's why this is where you're supposed to begin the parsha. Could be that's where the Rambam saw that the marbe u'moisef is in this parsha, because oinin olav dvarim harbe. That's the lashon of Chazal. So it's not enough to be oina, but harbe. What does harbe mean? Kalamarbe l'saper b'siyas Mitzrayim arezim meshubach. The kalamarbe l'saper is coming from the dvarim harbe. It's pashut. And if the dvarim harbe, this Rameh Simcha doesn't say, but it's pashut. If the dvarim harbe is coming from the onisa va'amarta oibazoi zok the Rambam, where you mekayim the kalamarbe l'saper b'siyas Mitzrayim arezim meshubach, you mekayim it with this Indian right here of Aram Yovedavi. But there's another question that the child is going to ask, and that is, I hear Chlor Mei Simcha Kedarke Bakodesh gave us a makar to a Mishnah in a pasuk in the Torah. But why did the Torah want that this is the way that we should be mekayim the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim? Is there a shortage of psukim in Shemois, Va'era, Boy, B'Shalach, or even in Mishnah Torah when we recount the events of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim through which we could be mekayim the mitzvah? I'll give you what I think would be a good suggestion of how we could be mekayim the mitzvah of oinin olav dvarim harbe and kol amarba l'saper. Maybe it's the psukim in Parshas V'aschan. Ki yishalchet bincha machaleim moha idas v'achukim v'amishpatim asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu eschem v'amarta levincha avodim ayinu l'par b'Mitzrayim v'yotzenu Hashem Mitzrayim b'yad chazak v'yitein Hashem oisus v'moisun d'olim v'ram b'Mitzrayim v'chulu v'chulu v'chulu. That would seem to be a very, very good place for us to say, be doirish this parsha, every single drasha you could come up with. But Chazal, the Torah, told us it's really the parsha Mikra Bikurim, and it's a little bit sussum why. I saw in the Haggadah Shal Pesach from Rabbi Yebarach Finkel, Zechat Tzaddik Levracha. He says something beautiful. He says that we spoke in one of the earliest shiur, it was part 2, that in the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, there's really 2 components. There's a mitzvah to talk about the nisim and the flies, to give us a chizuk and amunah, but there's also a mitzvah to give haidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is one of, if not the biggest nafkamina between the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim that you have every single day by Yom U'Balayla, and the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, which you have once a year, B'Leil HaSeder. In fact, that's why we spoke up from Rabbi Shmuel Yankov. The Rambam holds that the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim won't be noyed l'doiris based on Reb Chaim, because b'Mois HaMashiach we're going to have bigger miracles to talk about. But Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, which includes in it Hoidat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to perform bigger miracles for us doesn't mean we have to, or we're allowed to stop thanking Him for the lesser miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed. But the bottom line is, this is a Yisoid Miyusid, and that is that in the mitzvah of Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, Sedot Tzvei Dinim, Sedot Ein Din, that you talk about the Nisan. There's another din that you give Hoidat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This Parsha Mikra Bikurim, this recounting of the events of Mitzrayim is being said in what context? It's being said in the context of giving Haggadah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not the Haggadah Levincha where I'm merely transmitting the Messiah to my children. It's that and some. It's also an inyan of thank you Hashem that I was in such a matziv where Aram Yoivedavi, and then ultimately Vayinu Alamokim Hazeh Vayitin Lanu Esaretz Hazois Eretz Zavas Chalav Advash. The avoid of the Leila Seder is to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but do it with the Shevach Vayidah Digeknech. These are the psukim in the Torah, where the Torah says you do it in a Shevach Vayidah Digeknech. So Avadi, you say the nusach of the Keneged Arba Ban of Divrei Torah. That the Torah says you're supposed to say. But benoisa to that, you also have to give Hoidah. What's the nusach of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim in the context of Hoidah? It's these psukim that are tucked away right here in Parshas Kisavai. Either way, the avodah of today's shir is going to be Mekayim, what the Mishnah says, V'doirish me'arami oivedavi at she'yigmar kol ha'parsha kula. And really, if you think about it, this next segment of the Haggadah, which is a little choppy in nature, is really being Mekayim a line in the Mishnah. A line that the Rambam held was so critical. He held the Chol HaMar B'Lesapi B'Tzias Mitzrayim Me'reizim Meshuvach is actually in this avodah right here. We're going to see, we're going to learn drushes now. This is going to feel a little bit more like we do what we do, almost daf yomi dig, because we're going to go through Limudin, all focusing on trying to be doirish, quote unquote, not just mention the psukim, being doirish, these psukim in the parsha of Aram Yovidavi. But it begins as follows: Tzei ulamad, go out and learn. Tzei ulamad is similar to Tashma that you have throughout Shas, right? Taka feels like a daf a little bit. Tashma, kumen her. This is almost the opposite. Nish kum ge'ahoy soon learn, and then come back and have maybe. But either way, say ulamad go out and learn. Mabikish Lavan ha'arami lasis to Yaakov Avinu. What Lavan ha'arami wanted to do to Yaakov Avinu? Shaparo legazer al aschar, because Paroi, when he made his gzeira of every little baby boy that's born should be thrown into the river, he only said it about the baby boys, right? He said clearly v'chalabas techayim. But for Lavan bikish lakar sakol. But Lavan wanted to wipe out everybody. Shenemer, as the pasuk says, arami Vayered Mitzrayim, Vayagar Sham B'Msei Ma'at, Vayehi Sham L'Goy Gadol Atzim V'Rav. Now we're about to darshan this pasuk, but for now the Shenemar is referring to Arami Oivedavi. That from Arami Oivedavi you see Mabikesh Lavan Ha'arami Lasois L'Yaakov Avinu. It's interesting. We gave this whole elaborate introduction to this segment of the Haggadah, clearly implying that this segment of the Haggadah is really a whole new segment, right? So if we're holding Cheshbon, Magid began with Halach Ma'anya, this introduction that no one really knows exactly where it comes from. Then Magid starts with the child asking a question, specifically the 4 questions. And then we said the teretz is Aliba de Shmuel, and the teretz is Aliba de Rav, and then we threw in the Hisha Amda. This is now the next chelik of our kiyum of mitzvah sipa yitzias Mitzrayim per the Mishnah and Psachim Kuf Tezayin and Aleph. It's Pasha. That's what's going on over here. Stating that, if you look at the Rishonim struggle a little bit to understand the words tzeiulamad. Throws them for a loop. What's this tzeiulamad? That's how you start a sugya. Let's say tzeiulamad means what we know as tashma. You don't start a sugya tashma. You start a sugya with an ibaya, with a kasha, and then you'll start varfing all the tashmas. Tzeiulamad almost is a vav ha-mechaber le'inyan rishayin. It sounds like it's connecting what we're saying now to something that we said before. And some rishonim say that really there's a segue. Meaning, Avada was starting now to be Deirish Aram Yavidavi. Nobody's questioning that. But we want everything to flow. Everything should have a pattern. So even though the mitzvah of Sipi Yisiyas Mitzrayim, Magid is made up of components, but they flow. And the Tzeil Amad goes behemshich to what we said right before. We said, V'hisha amdalav yisenu v'lanu, sh'layechad bilvad amad aleinu l'chal yisenu, el sh'b'chayot avidar, oimdem aleinu l'chal yisenu, v'akadosh baruch hu matzleinu miyadam. Zogin the Rishonim, Tzeil Amad, I'll prove it to you. You know what the proof is? Take a look at Mabike Shloban Arami Las Yaakov. From the beginning of our history, we've already been dealing with this. We've already been struggling with this. Lovano Arami already tried killing Yaakov Avinu. Zoysei Meres Pari wasn't a chiddush. Elosh at the chol bevadar. Oimdem aleinu l'chalisenu v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. Another kasha that I saw all the Rishonim ask is, why do we mention Mabikesh Lovano Arami lasas Yaakov Avinu? in the Parasha Mikra Bikurim, it's Tzarech Bir, and even in the Haggadah, if you want to bring a riot of Yehisha Amdo, why Arami Oved Avi? So you'll tell me, I don't know, maybe this is the first time in history that somebody wanted to kill the Jews, right? This is the first final solution. It's not even the first final solution for Yaakov. Esav tried killing Yaakov before Lavan tried killing Yaakov. As a matter of fact, the reason Yaakov ran to Beis Lavan as a fugitive is because Esav was trying to kill him. So why are we mentioning Lavan? Why are we not mentioning Esav? I saw in the Briska Haggadah, Shira Salavim, they say, that Moran Agriz used to say, that the reason we mention Nabikesh Lavan Arami, Lasas the Yaakov Avinu, and we don't mention Esav, is because the V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam was Niskayin. By Lavan wasn't Niskayin yet by Esav. That's going to be V'olu Mosheim B'Hartzion Lishbeit Eshar Esav V'Oisel Hashem Amlucha. That's going to be by Yoimahu Yi Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. It wasn't Niskayin yet, so you can't say it. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam of Esav, this is something that we're waiting for. But the V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam of Lavan, that's something that was Niskayin. That's a disaster that we already averted. And as a result, that's something that we can mention. But one more Haisafa, I saw Rabbi Shmuel Yankiv in his Haggadah, he says, based on a Goyen that we've spoken about over the years, where the Goyen said that we know everything that happened to Klal Yisrael happened in a microcosmic form to the Avos HaKdoshim. What's referred to in the Rishonim as Maisa Avasim Labanim. And the Vilna Gaon said that the 20 years that Yaakov Avinu lived with Lavan, and then his Bericha, when he ran away from Beis Lavan, that was the Maisa Avasim Labanim to the Yidden's journey in Mitzrayim and the Yitzia Mimenu. And the Gaon brought a whole bunch of different remazim to it, Ki Yodua. We spoke about it most recently in the Chumash. So said Rabbi Shmuel Yankiv, that being that Yaakov Avinu staying in Beis Lavan was the mice of a symbol of Mitzrayim. So Kumta is that Golus, that Sarah is intrinsically bound to the story of Mitzrayim. And that's why when the Mevi Bikurim was telling the story of Mitzrayim, he started with Arami Oved Avi. In fact, that's the yachas, that's the shaykhis between Arami Oved Avi and Vayered Mitzrayim V'Yagam Shalom Seimah. But either way, this is more exclusively related to Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's for that reason here in the Haggadah, the night of Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, this is something that we mentioned. Either way, so again, we have to darshan these psukim from Arami Oved Avi. So far so good. We darshan Arami Oved Avi, and what's Arami Oved Avi? Arami is Lavan Arami. He wanted to be Oved Avi, but Machshava Ra Hakadosh Baruch Hu Mitzaref L'Maisa. By the way, if you look in the Rishonim Al Torah on the words Arami Oved Avi, starting with Even Ezra and the Rashbam, there's a very, very famous Mizrahi. We have a fartig bite on this, a long one. There's a lot of Pshutei Shal Mikra raid. In fact, this is maybe even Exhibit A for the whole Indian of Pshutei Shal Mikra. It's interesting. The first drasha that we have here of the Bin Dairish is something that is very much not like the Pshutei Shal Mikra. Again, this is not for now B'chal, but either way. So it says by Arami Oved Avi, Vayered Mitzrayim. What does that mean? We have to darshan it. Anus al pi adibur. When Yaakov Avinu went to Mitzrayim, he went anus al pi adibur. We always speak out from the Brisker Rav that even though Yaakov Avinu, when he went to Mitzrayim, he really went willingly, right? He went on his own volition. He wanted to see Yosef at Terem Amos. But then he went to Beersheba. And when he was in Beersheba, the Eibishter came to him and the Eibishter told him that I know you're going willingly, but I want you to stay. Don't just come back until I tell you to leave. So the Brisker Rav said, that's the Anus al pi hadibur. The Anus al pi hadibur was not going because really the Vayered Mitzrayim was something Yaakov wanted to do. But the fact that he ended up going in a way where he was going to have to stay until HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to come home, that was something that he was forced into. That's the Anus al pi hadibur. Because otherwise, if you know Chumash, it's impossible to read these words. Vayered Mitzrayim, Anus al pi hadibur. It's mamish Chumash. Forget Chumash Rasha. It's Chumash. The Pasuk says, Yaakov says, I have to go run and quickly see Yosef. Where's the Anus al pi hadibur? Vayogosh, on the next words. That you see that Yaakov Avinu, when he went, right, his initial intention was to literally just show up. And by the way, the Rishonim say that even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu now told him, I want you to remain there until I tell you to leave, but he was always a fremde. In his mind, he always had his valise packed, and he was ready to go. His passport was in his pocket. He was ready to leave the minute he was told he's allowed to leave. How do you know that Yaakov Avinu, when he went not lihishtageya, Ella l'shtakeya, Ella lagur. Shenever the pasuk says, "Vayomro Paroi." They told Paroi, "Lagur ba'aretz bana." Who's they? It's referring to the shiftei ka. They said, "We came lagur ba'aretz, came near latzoin Hashem la'avodecha, ki chaved hara be'eretz Canaan, v'ata yesh v'na'avodecha be'eretz Goshen." But he said in the footage, "Lagur ba'aretz bana." We just came now. There's a hunger. We're going to wait for the hunger to pass, and that's why we're here. B'msei ma'at. When Yaakov Avinu came, he came b'msei ma'at. I mean, there weren't a lot of people. Like the pasuk says, "V'shivim nefesh yardu avyisecha mitzrayim." This is a pasuk in Mishnah Torah. But when the Yidden came, they started up a Shivim Nefesh, and now they grew to one of the kashas the Rishonim ask, and we'll just highlight a few ha'aras, is that Shivim Nefesh Yordav Esachem Yitzrayim, we know from Dvarim Perik Yud Pasuk HaBeis, we know from Mishnah Torah. It says it several times in Parshas Bereshis, Vayisham the God. And when Yaakov Avinu came together with his family, they became a nation. What does it mean? Melamed shahoyu Yisrael mitzuyanim sham. We learn from here that they were mitzuyanim. So as this group of 70 people started multiplying, right, began them say ma'at, but they became a nation. A nation meaning they were mitzuyanim. Again, if you look at the Rishonim, they all say in their own nusach. Now, what does it mean they were mitzuyanim? They were able to be identified as a different group of people. Shaloishinu es shmam, shaloishinu es l'shoinam, shaloishinu es malbusham. This drasha that we say in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, Hashem Mekoroi is a sefri, is the makar to that Indian. There's remazim to it, but this is the makar. Vayisham the guy say the Rishonim Alami Shoyim Mitzuyanim Sham. This is where Chazal extrapolated this inyan Shaloishinu as Shemam l'Shoyim Malbusham, because these are three things that identify someone that belongs to a certain group, to a certain nation, and Malami Shoyim Mitzuyanim Sham. So I said, Maris, this is something that they had. Now they were a guy. Gadol, Atzum, V'Rav. So what do these things mean? So number one, Gadol, Atzum, K'ma shenemar. U'bnei Yisrael paru vayishritzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, b'ma'od ma'od, v'akimolei aretz oisam. So you see, paru, vayishritzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, b'ma'od ma'od, v'akimolei aretz oisam. So Meres, they became very, very great. They became Gadol, and they became Atzum. If you look in the Rishonim, so there's a lot of confusion, different pshatim. What's the difference between Gadol and Atzum? We'll just mention one pshat, and that is Gadol is Bekamos and Atzum is Beichos. So they were Gadol, Shisha Bekeres Echad. They were also Atzum, qualitatively Beichos. They became very, very impressive as well. Now, on top of being Gadol v'Atzum, they were also Rav. Now, really, if they're Gadol and Atzum, so Kamusu Be'echis, so it sounds like they checked off all their boxes. They hit for the cycle already. What else is there? What could you be more than great Bekamus and Be'echis? On top of that, it was also V'Rav. So the Rishonim say that V'Rav means that they continued to grow after they were Gadol v'Atzum. Meaning, you could say someone is great bekamas, yeah, but he's still earning a big return on whatever it is he's worth. His eichus is continuing to grow. As a matter of fact, they say Rav should be read not so much as an adjective or a noun, it's more like a verb. They're continuously growing. They were Gadol v'Atzum, and on top of that, not they reached the state of Rav, but they were Nisrabah. That's what the Rishonim say. Kamash never. What's the makar to this? How do you know this inyan of a Rav? It's a pasuk in Yecheskel. Revava kitzemach hasada nisatich. Referring to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, Revava. They were Nisrabah kitzemach hasada. So you see a field, right? You're Zayreya b'Shazriya, and then all of a sudden everything starts growing. Klal Yisrael grew. Revava, there was this riboy. It was kitzemach hasada, vatirbi, vatigdali, right? They were growing, becoming great. Vatavai, and then all of a sudden they matured to a point, ba'adi adayim, where they had jewelry. Shadayim, nochaynu, referring to the Dadei Ha'isha, Usa'arech, Tzimeach, and they had the Cyrus, stating that, V'at Eiroim Ve'erya, but at the same time, they didn't have any clothing. So the Navi says, Ve'ever alayich Ve'erech, Misaiseses B'damayich, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I passed by and I saw that they were immersed in blood, Va'im Malach, and I then said to Klal Yisrael, this Isha in the Mashal, B'damayich Chayi, that because of your blood you're going to live, Va'im Malach B'damayich Chayi, because of your blood you're going to live. Now we brought this whole arichas, this whole long pasuk for one reason, that there was an Indian of Revava, there was an Indian of a Rav. So Klal Yisrael was Gadol v'Atzum, Bnei Yisrael paru v'yishtu v'yirba v'yatzim moed v'apatim alei aretz chayz. But on top of that, they continuously were growing. Revava kitzemach hasada nesatich. Kitzemach hasada doesn't stop growing; it just grows and grows, shrieking as high as it whatever it's going to become. And that was this Indian. Klal Yisrael just continued to grow. It was a bechina of a Rav, and this concludes the drushes of the very first pasuk of Mikra Bikurim. So the first pasuk is Aram Yovedavi, Vayered Mitzrayma, Vayagar Sham B'Msei Ma'at, Vayehi Sham B'Goy Gadol Atzim V'Rav. So that's Chazarov. What are the drushes? Aram Yovedavi is referring to Lavan Arami. Yovedavi, Bikesh Lavidas Avi. But Machshavara Kadosh Baruch Hu Mitzaref L'Maisa. And that's because Lavan was Bikesh Laker Esakot. Years later, Vayered Mitzrayim, Yaakov Avinu went to Mitzrayim. Onos al pi hadibur. Even though he went willingly, but he was told not to come back until the time is to come. Vayagar, and when he got there, he was always ready to return. He was waiting for the call. But in his mind, hopefully it's this second. He didn't go lehishtakeya, rather he went look. When he went b'msei ma'at, he went b'shivim nefesh. But when he was there, vayisham l'goy gadol atzim v'rav. Number one, his descendants remained the nation. L'shinu eshmam l'shaynu b'mabushan. They were gadol b'kamos, they were atzim b'echos v'rav. And even when they reached a certain plateau, they continued to grow. It was revava kitzemach hasod and esatich. Now before we dash in the second pasuk, one ha'ara nifla mamish v'ruyin advarim l'misha amra v'divrei pi chacham chen, and any other adjective I could think of that I saw in the Haggadah Shal Pesach be'er Miriam from Agoyin Rabruva Margolis. And that is, so we just mentioned the pasuk revava kitzemach hasod and esatich, and then the end of the pasuk is va'at iroin ve'eryo va'ever alayich va'erech mispaiseses b'damayich va'omer lach b'damayich chayi va'omer lach b'damayich chayi. And everybody knows Chazal. Ramasya ben Charash used to darshan this pasuk in Chaymer. Rashi brings it in Parshas Boy, the Makor is a Mechilta, that the time had come for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to redeem Klal Yisrael. And he looked at the Yidden and he saw that Aaron the area. They were Orim in HaMitzvahs. Like we had in the Gemara Masechtas Menachos, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, David HaMelech was Orim in HaMitzvahs. That Aaron the area. Klal Yisrael, she was Orim in HaMitzvahs, no schusim to be able to leave. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu went, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Yidden two mitzvahs. He gave the Yidden the mitzvah of Dam Pesach, and he gave the Yidden the mitzvah of Dam Milah. And in the schus of those two mitzvahs, they left Mitzrayim. Is ve'ever alayich ve'erech mispaiseses b'damoyich, va'omer lach b'damayich chayi v'dam Milah, va'omer lach b'damayich chayi v'dam Pesach, and it was in the schus of those two mitzvahs that ultimately Klal Yisrael was able to get out. Says Rabbi Margolis, there's a medrash. This is in Shir Hashirim. It's Parsha Hey Gimel. It's going on the pasuk that says, Ani yeshena v'li bi'er, kol doidi doifeg, pischili, achisi, rayasi, yoinasi, tamasi, sheroishi nimlo tol, kvutsoisai resisei loiro. In English, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. The sound of my beloved knocking. Open up for me, my sister, my beloved, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is filled with dew, my locks with the droplets of that night. One of the psukim in Shir Hashirim, this is in Perikei Pasuk Beis. The Medrash goes, and the Medrash says that in this Pasuk, Klal Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, their relationship is referred to as Achoisi, Rayasi, Yoinasi, and Samasi. What do all these things mean? Says the Medrash. What does Achoisi mean? Shenesachu li b'Mitzrayim b'shtei mitzvahs. That Klal Yisrael and Kadosh Baruch Hu, they became bahoften. They became attached to each other. They became connected. Achoisi miloshin, to be connected. And how did it happen? It happened through two mitzvahs. B'dam Pesach u'b'dam Amilah. Hadol d'chsiv zok the Medrash. Ve'ever alayich ve'erech mispaiseses b'dam moyech. Va'omer lach b'dam mayich chayi zeh dam Pesach. Va'omer lach b'dam mayich chayi zeh dam Milah. Says Rab Reuven Margolis. Lulei de mistafina. This is the oimek in a drush and chazal that's mentioned in so many different places. Brachis, Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis, Megillah, Daf Gimel Amud Beis. It's a Gemara Masechtas Nazir. It's a Gemara in so many places. The Gemara says that it says regarding the Nazir like the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to be metama to a mace. The Nazir like the Kohen Gadol can't even be metama to his karev. The pasuk says regarding the Nazir, lo aviv u'le'imai, lo achiv u'le'achaisai lo yitam lehem. This is so good. Says the Medrash. All these words seem to be extra, because once you tell me the Nazir is not allowed to be metama, so I know he can't be metama la'aviv u'le'imai la'achiv u'le'achaisai. And in one of the shvers to dafen and shas in the Masechtas Nazir, the Gemara goes through each one. Why does it say la'aviv, and why does it say le'imai? Why does it say la'achaisai? But over here in Brachas Yud Tes Amud Beis, we just single out la'achaisai. Says the Gemara, and everyone knows this Gemara. Anyone that learns Daf Yomi, if somebody was on his way to Shech the Carbon Pesach, and he was on his way to do Bris Milah, and he heard that one of his krivim died. Yochel yachsav yatama. You would think he should be metama. Amrit lo yatama. Yochel kishem she'ena metama lehem kachin metama l'meis mitzvah. Talmud loyro la'choisu de'ena metama ava metama l'meis mitzvah. Chazal gave us an halacha. If somebody's on his way to shech the Karban Pesach, if someone's on his way to do bris milah, v'shama shemeis l'meis, what's his shulchan aruch as it relates to being metama? Again, suga shver suga beyond the scope of what we're doing right now. But what's the remes to shaharei shahayol hoylech lishchet es pischay v'lamal es b'nai? It's from la'choisai. What does that have to do with Karban Pesach and with Bris Milah? A drasha that we've learned together so many times. Zok Rav Ruven Margolis. It's this medrash right here. La'achoisi shenes'achu li b'mitzrayim b'shtei mitzvahs b'dam ha-Pesach u'b'dam ha-Milah. These were the two mitzvahs that made us achoisi with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why even in this subtle drasha of Chazal, u'la'achoisi ma-talmud loymar harei shahoya hoylech lishchet es pischay. He says in Mamash like in one line at the end of a shtickle that Ulai, this is the reason, this V'zeu shenoktu v'gemara brachos yotes seifam edbeis Ulachoisei matal meloymar hareish hayoylach nishchet es pischay v'lav es benoi v'chulu. Half full of a fella. Either way, the next pasuk here in the parsha of Aram Yovedavi is Vayoreo Isanu HaMitzrim Vaye'anunu Vayitnu Oleinu Avodah Kasha. The taich is very self-explanatory. What about the droshes? Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim Kamasha Nemar. What does that mean? Hava Neschak Maloi. Penyir B'Vayu Kisekrenu Melcham B'Neitzav Gam Hu Atzeinenu V'Nilcham Banu V'Alam Enaretz. So whatever Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim means, the raya to this, so to speak, is Hava Neschak Maloi Penyir B'Vayu Kisekrenu Melcham B'Neitzav Gam Hu Atzeinenu V'Nilcham Banu V'Alam Enaretz. If you look at the Rishonim struggle to understand this. What do you see in that pasuk Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim? You see Hava Neschak Maloi. Let's come up with some sort of idea. But where do you see that it actually happened? If you want to tell me Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim, there's a lot of psukim that you could say. We're going to mention them in a second. Vayimaru es Chayeyem, right? Those would be good psukim to mention. Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim Kamasha Nemar. Hava Neschak Maloi. The Shibbolei Aleket says that you see from here that Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim doesn't mean that they actually did something bad. Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim means that they conspired. They got together and they said, let's try to come up with a way to make the Yidden's lives miserable. If that's the taich of Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim, that's Kamasha Nemar, Hava Neschak Maloi. It was done with Chachma. So said the Shibbolei Aleket, I'm so bothered, I'm so perturbed by this question, that I think from the Kamasha Nemar, Hava Neschak Maloi, that's a gilui in what Vayirei Osanu HaMitzrim must mean, and it must mean a bechina of Hava Neschak Maloi. Vaye'anunu. What does that mean, Kamasha Nemar? Yasinu all of a sudden, Nisim L'man HaNoisai, right? They haben ins gepeinigt. They made our lives very difficult. And it says, Mefurish, Numan HaNoisai, this of Loisam, even our Miskin, Safari, as Pisa and as Ramses. Again, all very self-explanatory. And they imposed on us Avodah Kasha. So we know there's a lot of droshes in the word Befarach, but Atzad HaShav Shabehen is that it was very, very difficult work. So again, Vayorei Osanu HaMitzrim means they conspired. That's Hava Neschak Maloi. They executed Vaye'anunu, that was Laman HaNoisai, Vayinu Aleinu Avodah Kasha, that's a reference to the Avodas part. The next pasuk. V'nitzach al Hashem Elikei Aviseinu. We called out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayishma Hashem es koileinu, Vayares onyenu, Ves amoleinu, ves lachatzenu. So we davened HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem heard our tefillos, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw our suffering. He saw onyenu, amoleinu, lachatzenu. What do all these things mean? We called out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kamasha Nemar, Vayiba yomim harabim mohem, and this is Shemois Perik Beis. This is literally right in the beginning of the Tzaras. Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Mitzrayim died. Vaye'onchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avoda, vayizaku, vatal shavasim elu elikim min ha'avoda. And the Yidden went out and they began to cry. Vayishma Hashem es koileinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard their cries. Kamasha Nemar. It's the very next pasuk in the Torah. Vayishma Elokim es nakasam. Vayiskra Elokim es brisoi, es Avram, es Yitzchak, ves Yaakov. And what happened immediately after that? HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So, they davened, that's one pasuk. Hashem heard their tefillah. The next pasuk. Mamash, the next pasuk. Perik Beis pasuk of Gimel, they davened. Perik Beis Pasuk Abdal, the Eibishter heard their tefillah. And then right afterwards, in Perek Gimel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Either way, Vayaris Onyenu, what does that mean? Zuprishus Derech Eretz. He saw the fact that Yidden had to be Poirish from Derech Eretz, from Tashmish Hamita. Kemoshe Nema, like the Pasuk says, Vayar Lekim Es Bnei Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw the Bnei Yisrael, Vayeda Elokim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew. In the Haggadah Shal Pesach of the Vilna Gaon, so the Gaon asked that, how did Chazal know Vayaris Onyenu over here means Prishus Derech Eretz? Now, the truth is, you find this inyan of Onyenu, Inui, referring to Prishus Derech Eretz. We mentioned it in one of the earlier shiurim, where Lavan told Yaakov, Penta'ana has been noisai, and it means that don't withhold Derech Eretz from them. But the Goyen said that we just had the word Vaye'anunu, and over there, the Balagada didn't teach Vayanuna as Prishus Derech Eretz, but rather to the contrary, it's Laman Anoisoi B'Savoisam. So why over here would it mean Prishus Derech Eretz? If anything, there was a Vayanunu, which means Inui, Vayares Onyenu. The Eibishter saw that Inui. Poetically, symmetrically, it would make more sense. So how did Chazal know to darshan over here Onyenu zu Prishus Derech Eretz? So the Goyen said, you know what the raya is of Chazal? Vayar Elikim es b'nei Yisrael, Vayeda Elikim. Vayeda Elikim sounds like it was something that only the Eibishter knew. It was Dvarim Shebetzina. And that's what Chazal knew, that Vayaris Onyenu was something that Vayeda Elikim, the Eibishter knew. Nobody else knew. This was Chazal's Mekar to teach Onyenu zu Prishus Derech Eretz. What's that? In other words, what does it mean that the Eibishter saw Amalenu? What was happening to Amalenu? Our children, what? They weren't being tortured. I mean, they weren't working. They were probably too young. But what the Eibishter saw was they were being forced, at least the boys, to be thrown into the Yam. That's Lachatzenu. What does that mean? Zayatchak. Lachatzenu is referring to the Tchak. K'mashenem v'gam ro'isi as halachatz Hashem Mitzrayim loichatzim oisa. So what does Tchak mean? So the Goyen in his Pirush on Haggadah says, Tchak means that the Yidden were living in very, very tight quarters. So they had these very, very large families, and they were living in Goshen, they were living in a proverbial ghetto. And as a result, they lived in these very, very tight quarters, and that's Lachatzenu, that's what it means, Zehat Tchak. I saw Reb Shmuel Yankiv in the Zois Yaakov Haggadah says that obviously, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, so they had a geula from all the tzaras that they had been subjected to. Avodim hayinu, now they were ready bnei chayim. One of the tzaras said the Goyim was, the pasuk emphasizes, this makes the top three, literally, Onyenu, Amalenu, Alachatzenu, is Zehat Tchak. That means in Gulas Mitzrayim, there had to be a geula on the Tchak. Where was the Geula on the Tchak? He said, because when the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael, that's the fifth lashon of Geula. Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Tzvi. It's a land that expands. So they went from being Avadim in Mitzrayim, Ve'eslachatzenu Zehatchak, where now all of a sudden it's Eretz Tzvi. Now they're living in a world where Me'olam Layamar Adam Tzar Li'amakom. Now they're living in a world where they're Oimnim Tzfufim, but they're Mishtachnim Revachim. Now at the Leila Seder we're living in a world where we could say Kol Dichvin Yesef Yechol, Kol because now already we're not bound by physics anymore. We were so meshubik to the physics. This is the oimik. We were so meshubik to the physics when we were avodim in Mitzrayim that literally it was veslachatzenu ze'atchak. But part of the geula is that now we operate l'maylam and ateva. Now we're not meshubik to physics anymore. Now already we live in a land that for us is already Eretz Tzvi. Either way, this concludes the drushes of the third of the psukim here in Aram Yovedavi. V'nitzak al Hashem alekei aviseinu, we daven. V'yishma Hashem es koleinu, Hashem heard our tefillas. This is simple arithmetic. V'yar es onyenu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw not the leman anoisoi, says the guy. This is something else. He saw the miut, the precious derech eretz. How do you know that? Because you find this inyan by the Inoy of Vayeda Elikim, was something that only the Eibishter knew. Vesamalenu Elu Abanim, specifically what? Right? The Velt says Vesamalenu Elu Abanim, specifically nothing. Vesamalenu Elu Abanim. But in the Haggadah, Vesamalenu Elu Abanim means the fact that the Banim were forced to be thrown into the Yar. The Esmachatzenu, specifically the fact that we're living in Tchak. But another pasuk. Vayisenu Hashem in Mitzrayim, the Eibishter took us out of Mitzrayim. B'yad Chazaka, u'bizroya netuya, so these words, these adjectives describe how Yetzias Mitzrayim took place. They happened b'yad chazaka, b'zroya netuya. They happened b'meira gadol u'ba'issus u'v'moifsen. The truth is, as we're about to see, that really the Gagal Gag description of how Yetzias Mitzrayim took place is actually referenced in the first words. Vayetzienu Hashem mi Mitzrayim. It says the Baal Haggadah. Lo yal yedei malach. V'lo al yedei saraf, v'lo al yedei shliach, ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidei uva'atzmai. When we left Mitzrayim, it was Vayotzienu Havaya mi Mitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidei v'atzmai took us out of Mitzrayim. How do you know that? Shenemar v'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'alai v'azeh v'yikesi kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim mi'adam v'ad behema uv'chol alihei Mitzrayim es hashvatim ani Hashem. You see it in this pasuk. V'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'alai v'azeh ani v'loi malach v'yikesi kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim ani v'loi sor v'chol alihei Mitzrayim es hashvatim ani v'loi yashliach ani Hashem ani hu v'loi yachid. In other words, we just said Vayotzeinu Hashem mi Mitzrayim was loy al yidei malach, loy al yidei soraf, v'loy al yidei shliach, ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'chvoidei v'atzmai. Right? Essentially, we said four things. All four of these things are referenced in a pasuk. V'avarti me'eretz Mitzrayim b'alai v'azeh, v'ikesi kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim mi'adam ad behema, u'v'chol alihei Mitzrayim es hashvatim ani Hashem. V'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'alai v'azeh, that's one. That's the first. That's Dani v'loy malach. V'ikesi, again, me, that's Dani v'loy saraf. U'v'chol alihei Mitzrayim ese, me, that's Ani v'lo yishliach, and then that final mention of Ani Hashem, that's Ani hu v'lo yach. B'yod chazaka. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, and He took us out b'yod chazaka. Zu ha-dever. It's referring to dever, specifically. And you would think it's referring to all the makkos. No, specifically dever. K'ma shenemar, as the pasuk says, Hine yad Hashem hoya b'miknecha, Hashem b'asada, b'asusim, b'chamoyim, b'gmalim, b'bogim, b'tzoyim, dever kavim noid. So dever is one of the makkos. And by dever you find the lashon of Hine yad havaya hoya b'miknecha. So if it says b'yad chazaka, it's a shout out to dever. All the Rishonim ask. You find the lashon of yad chazaka referring to the entire Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'yotzienu Hashem Elokeinu b'yad chazaka v'zorin etuya. That's the answer. That's the tshuva to the Ben Chacham and Parshas Vaschana. Right? You find it so many different times. B'yad chazaka zu hadever ayin b'rishayin u'b'zorin etuya zu hacherev. It's referring to a sword. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim with a sword. K'ma shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'charboi shlufa b'yadoi Netuya al Yerushalayim. It's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, but it's referring to a sword that was shlufa b'yadai. Now this pasuk is not talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim. The charbe shlufa b'yadai netuya al Yerushalayim. But you see that the Eibishter has a cherev, and that's this inyan of ubezraya netuya. It was done with a cherev. Also, Rishonim say it's referring to Makkos B'chayros. The Makkos B'chayros was done with a cherev, and the remes to it is the pasuk says hineni hoireges bincha b'chayrecha, and we know from learning Masechta Sanhedrin that hereg is misa sayif, so that involves a cherev. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu killed the Mitzrim, it was something that happened with a sword. Ubemayra gadol, what happened with a mayra gadol was Gilu Shechina. It means that the Yidden were able to see the Shechina. There was an incredible Malchuscha Rov Vanecha. They were able to see the Shechina when they left Mitzrayim. Like the pasuk says, Oy hanisa Elokim lavoi lokachos loigoy mikerev goy. Right? Has there ever been such a thing where HaKadosh Baruch Hu went and He took a nation from the midst of a nation, but masois, ba'oisois, uvemoivsim, ubebelchama, ubiyad chazaka, ubezrei netuya, uvemeiran gedolim, kechol asher asal lechem Hashem lekecha b'mitzrayim le'enecha. Right, has anything like this ever happened? But the bottom line is, from here you see, uvemeira gadol, zu gilu shchina. Where do you even see this here? So the Rishonim say that the word b'meira over here, usually meira means yira, fear. B'meira over here means re'iyah. And that's Uvemeira Gadol. It was a re'iyah. You were able to see the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the raya is from this pasuk. You know what the raya is? Because the pasuk mentions all these things. Oises, Moivsim, Melchama, Yad Chazak, Zoynetu, Meiram, Gedolim. And in the end, Kechalach, Asal Lechem Hashem Lekech B'Mitzrayim Le'einecha. So really the punchline of this paragraph is the Le'einecha. That's where you see Meira over here means re'iyah. As a matter of fact, if you look at the words Ubemeiram Gedolim in the pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Dal, Pasuk Lamed, look at the Targum. Targum says Ubemeiram Gedolim Chazuz. I don't have the word in front of me, but he says it's a lashon of re'iyah, and that's uvemeira gadol is re'iyah. Uba moisais, Kadosh Baruch Hu did it with oisais a hamata. That's referring to the mata of Moshe Rabbeinu. K'ma shenema ves hamata azeh tikach biyadecha asher tasa boyasa oisais. So you see the mata is associated with the oisais. Uvemoivsim yitzis Mitzrayim happy when moivsim zehadam. That's referring to the blood. Pasha means the makkah of dam, but there was other blood as well. Kamuvan, Kamashanema, like the pasuk says, "V'nasati moifsim." You find there was this inyan of there being moifsim. As a matter of fact, not only was there blood, but there was dam, v'eish, there was fire as well, v'simrais ashan, and there were pillars of smoke. So what's the drasha of the fourth pasuk? Vayitzeinu Hashem miMitzrayim biyad chazaka. ubezroya netuya, uvemoira gadol, ubeoises uvemoisim. Vayotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ani v'loi malach, ani v'loi sorach, ani v'loi shliach, ani hu v'loi yacha. Biyad chazaka, that's a reference specifically to Dever. Ubezroya netuya, a stretched out arm, yielding a sword. Kipshute referring to makas b'chayros. Uvemoira gadol, the Yid were able to see. There was a gilui shchina, meira miloshin re'iyah. The Yidden saw great things. Uba'oisos is a reference to the matter of Moshe. Uvemoifsim is a reference to Dam, but there was not just Dam, there was Eish, and there was Simras Asham. Just to finish the Brisa, Dover Achar, another pshat in this pasuk. So again, the first pshat we just mentioned, Yod Chazak is this, Zorenetu is that, Meir Gadol is the other thing, Oisis is a fourth thing, Moifsim is a fifth thing. There's another pshat. That these words are a remes to something that we all know. Biyad chazak is shtayim. That's a remes to two makkes. Ubezroina to yishtayim. Another two makkes. Uve meir gadol shtayim, another two makkes. Uve oisois shtayim. Uve moisim shtayim. Back to the envelope of arithmetic, it's 5 times 2, or 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, we end up with his 10, and these are, says the Baal Haggadah, Elu Eser Makkos She'evi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ala Mitzri Mitzrayim. These are the 10 makkos. It's a remes to the 10. By the way, where's the remes? Because the Rishonim say, Biyad Chazak is 2 words, so that's 2. Ubezrayim Etuya is 2 words, so that's 2. Uvemeir Gadol is 2 words, that's 2. Oisos is 1 word, but it's Lashon Rabbim, so that's 2. Moifsim is 1 word, it's Lashon Rabbim, but it's 2. The bottom line is 10. These are the 10 makkos. The Elu, hey, you want to know what the 10 makkos are? You're going to have to wait for the next year. That's already the next year. We'll discuss exactly what the 10 makkos are, but we had to make the hemshech. Right, people stop very often right before dawn. The ages and Rosh he's not getting busy with the wine. He's not getting dirty, making a mess. That's what you're supposed to do. We're going to talk about that in the next year. But really, it's a hemshech. In fact, Dover Achar, right? Dover Achar is obviously referring to something else. It's referring to the way we darshan that last pasuk. So again, what was the avodah of today's shir? It was going through the psukim in Parshas Kisavai, in the Parsha of Mikra Bikurim, being doiresh me'arami yovid avi until the end of the Parsha, based on what the Mishnah instructs us to do in Perek Arbi Psachim Daf Kufte Zayin Amud Aleph, and the Rambam brings lahalacha, makes a huge deal about it in Hilchas Chametz U'Matzah Perek Zayin Halacha Dal. Now, if you notice, how many psukim did we go through? We went through 4 psukim. As a matter of fact, we went through 3.5 psukim. It's in the beginning of Parshas Kisava, which begins Perek Chavav Pasuk Aleph. We started from the middle of Pasuk Hey. That we didn't darish. We started from the middle of the Pasuk. Right? Called Psuka Delei Paske Moshe Anan Le Paskina. A little bit of a error, by the way. But we started darishing from the middle of the Pasuk. Arami Yovid Avi Vayer Mitzrayim V'Yogsham Seim Vada Yisham L'Gadol L'Matzav Rav Vayirei Osan HaMitzvah Anu Vayidol L'Yivon Kasha V'Nizag L'Shem L'Kev V'Sem Yishma Hashem Eskolenu V'Zeh Aretz L'Nev Tzalnei B'Chachatzenu V'Yitzeinu Hashem L'Kev V'Sem L'Chazak V'Sem Yetud V'Margol V'Yism and we stop. It's interesting that we stop, because the pasuk continues, Vayivienu ala makom hazeh, Vayitein lenu as haaretz hazois, Eretz avos chol levash, Va'ata hine evesi es reishis pri adama. So you'll tell me, okay, maybe you don't have to say the whole parsha. It's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, V'derish me'rami yovid avi, ad sheyigmar kol ha-parsha kula. Mishnah says, Mefurish, you have to say the entire parsha. The teretz is, you have to say the entire parsha that relates to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And even though I think it would be very right to be ma'orer, isn't Vayivienu ala makom hazeh part of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Isn't that the 5th lashon of Geula? I hear. But we're focusing on the Ikar Yetzia of Mitzrayim, and that's told in these 4, or more accurately, 3.5 psukim, and that's why it's those psukim that we talk about. But just to end with one ha'ara, the second ha'ara is being left on the table, and that is, so one of the psukim that we mentioned is Vanitzak el Hashem Elokei Aviseinu, Vayishma Hashem es koilenu, Vayares onyenu, Ve'es amolenu, Ve'es lachatzenu, Vayotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim. The pasuk seems to say very clearly that the reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim is because we davened. Vanitzak el Hashem Elokei Aviseinu, Vayishma Hashem es koilenu, Vayares onyenu, Vayotzienu. Right? Pretty straightforward. What schus did the Yidden have to leave Mitzrayim? It's very simple. It's the fact that we davened and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu listened to our tefillah. Just to say this in a different nusach. These 3.5 psukim right here in Parshas Kisava is the shortest version ever of the story of Mitzrayim. Right? So the most high-level, 20,000-foot view, critical type of information that you need to know in order to understand the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim are in these psukim. So, if you need to know why the Yidden were able to leave Mitzrayim, it's very simple. It's even one word, Vanitzach. And it's because of that we were Zoicha to leave Mitzrayim. But the truth is, it's not so pashut, because we know from learning the psukim and just from hearing Chazals over the years, there are a lot of different things that seem to be reasons why we left Mitzrayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu, for starters, promised Avram Avinu by the Bris Bein Absarim. We just said it. Baruch Shomer Havtachasai. Everybody screams Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that you'll be avodim va'achrechem yetzu b'chush gadol. So we know without a question that the Bris Bein Absarim, the Havtachat Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, had a huge role in why it is that the Yidden left Mitzrayim. Additionally, we just mentioned a massive Achoresh earlier in the shir, and that is ve'ever alayich ve'erech mispaiseses b'damayich v'oimelach b'damayich idam Pesach v'oimelach b'damayich chayi. There was the Amila. Chazal says shloishinu eshmav l'shayim u'mabusha. There's different reasons that have always been given in terms of why it is that the Yidden left Mitzrayim. From these psukim, it sounds like v'nitzak el Hashem alekei aviseinu v'yishma Hashem es koleinu. Now, the truth is, these psukim have a makar. Not that a pasuk needs a makar, but in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, we sourced what we say when we bring the Bikurim to something that the Torah mentions, and that is that the tzaros got so bad. Vayi bayom arab nehem vayomas melech Mitzrayim. Vayi onchu b'nei Yisrael minu avoda. Vayi zaku vatal shavas Elokim minu avoda. Vayi shmalikim es nakasam. Vayi yiskolkim es brisoi es Avram Yitzchak es Yaakov. It's the same exact narrative. Literally, it was a Vayitzak. Well, there it's Vayi zaku vatal shavasam. Yishma, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, let's get going. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu reaches out to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the rest is history. So really, in those psukim and Parashat Shemos, it also sounds like the reason we left Mitzrayim is not so much the Bris Bein Absarim, it's not so much Tam Pesach and Amila, it's not so much Vayihisham the Goy, that Balami Chayim Mitzuyanim Sham. It sounds like it was related to our tefillah. So what is it? Is it the tefillah? Is it? How do we reconcile? How do we make sense of all these different things that are juggling inside our mind that we've heard over the years, right? We need a little bit of Clarkite over here. So the Maramakim is the Ramban, like it always says. The Ramban, in his Pirush al HaTorah, on those psukim in Parashat Shemos, he says as follows, V'herech HaKosov lahaskir tainos rabbis begalusan. The Torah is Meirich, and the Torah talks about different reasons for why the Yidden were taken out of Mitzrayim. It says, Vayishma lekim es nakosam, Vayiskal lekim es brisi, Brisoi, Vayar Elikim, Vayeda Elikim. Right? There's a whole bunch of different reasons that are given. But at the end of the day, says the Ramban, there's a doglish on Tefillah. And says the Ramban, I'm going to tell you why. It's because there were taka sibos that could have been reasons for the Yidden to leave Mitzrayim. And they for sure played a role. But here's the problem. At the end of the day, the Yidden weren't worthy. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avram Avinu, but take a look at what Klal Yisrael looks like. And it's true, this, that, and the other thing. L'maisa, we were lacking. But because, says the Ramban, because we yelled and we screamed and we davened, Kibot Tfilas Barach Kadosh Baruch Hu was Makaber al Tefillah Barachman. So that at the end of the day, there were sibos that could have been Goyim in Tzias Mitzrayim. But l'maisa, we weren't worthy. We needed a tefillah to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, look away from all those miniyas and trigger the Bris Bein Absarim and all those sibos that there are for you to be able to take us out of Mitzrayim. But at the end of the day, were it not for our tefillah, were it not for the Vanitzak el Hashem alekei aviseinu, we would have not left Mitzrayim. We left Mitzrayim, says the Ramban, mipnei hatza'aka. It was only because of the fact that we davened. And that's why in the shortest recap of the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, what do we mention? We mention over here, we mention the Vanitzak. I saw in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, from Ramaylich Biederman, say he brings from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rayatz. He used to say that we think today that the reason we're still in Golus, and the reason we haven't had a Geula yet, is because we don't have a leader like Moshe Rabbeinu. If there'd be a Moshe Rabbeinu to take us out of our Golus, we'd be out of Golus. The ingredient of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we're lacking, we sort of think, is that we're not a Dardeya. We don't have a Moshe and a Aaron. But the Rebbe Rayatz used to say that's not. He says, you want to know which one of the ingredients of Yetzias Mitzrayim we're lacking, Bismanenu? We don't have the Vanitzak. That's what we don't have. And he said, if we would have the Vanitzak in the same exact way, we would also be Zoichet to come out of the Gula. That's what this Doir is missing. The Yeridus HaDoiris is not in the Manik. The Yeridus HaDoiris is in the Vanitzak. Because ultimately that's what took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. And if we would be able to yell and scream in an ehrlich way, the way the Yidden did in Mitzrayim, there's no question in the world we'd be Zoichet Vayishma Hashem es Koilenu, Vayares Onyenu, Vesamolenu, Veslachatzenu, and be Vayetzienu Hashem. Hashem would take us already out of the Golas. And then it says it's Yedua from the Sfarim HaKadoshim that when the Yid is reading the Haggadah and he comes to the Vanitzak, that if a Yid screams and he yells for whatever it is, was slick them up in heart. It's a tremendous ace rotzen. It's a tremendous man mesugel for his tefillah to be answered. And just like Klal Yisrael, when they were Vanitzak, they be'etzim weren't roy lekach. They weren't worthy of their tefillahs being answered, like the Ramban says. And it was only because they davened that ultimately they were able to get out. That Inyan is Nisoyer 3,338 years later, mamish, where a person could be Vanitzak on that night, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is maftiach that he's going to go ahead and he's going to answer that tefillah. I just wanted to share one hergish on the Vanitzak, which plays a very prominent role in the Sidorim of the Yidden. And befrat, the fact that this Vanitzak has a special koyach to be poyel and to literally make a roishim in Shemayim in ways that other tefillahs maybe don't have to. And this is based on the Torah that I heard from Agoyin, Rabbi Yosef Ernst Shlita, the Rav and the Alexander Besmedrash. He said a Maisa with the Hilug Baal Shem Tov. So one year, it was Yom Kippur, and the Baal Shem Tov came to daven in the morning, and the Olam saw that something was different about the Baal Shem Tov. Something was bothering him. Always, during his tefillahs, there was a certain glow, befrat, on the Yom HaKadosh. And this day, there was something different. And the Chassidim were trying not to look, but how could you not notice? The great Rebbe, something is clearly bothering him. And whatever it was that was bothering him was something that he carried with him literally for the entire day, until Ne'ilah. When Ne'ilah came, all of a sudden the Baal Shem Tov went back to being Ivdu as Hashem b'simcha, the Gilu b'ra'ada, and that Hadras Panim, that shine, that glow that always emanated from the great tzaddik all of a sudden returned. And the Chassidim were looking and they were wondering, and they couldn't figure out, what was going on over here. And then finally, by the Suda, Maitzah Yom Kippur, one of the Chassidim, he mustered up the courage, and he asked the Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, we noticed something was a little bit different during this Avodah of Yom Kippur. And then all of a sudden, by Ne'ilah, it changed. What happened? So the Rebbe said, I'll be honest with you. He said, I started davening Yom Kippur, and I realized that this year, the Kitrugim connected Klal Yisrael were very, very intense. And there's always certain tikkunim and inyanim that I'm able to be poil with my tefillah, and it's nicht gegangen. And whatever I tried didn't work. I tried coming from this angle, and I tried coming from that angle, and whatever I tried doing failed miserably. He said, right before Ne'ilah, there was a Yidina, there was a woman who was in the Ezras Nashim, who had come to daven. Now this woman, for many, many years, had not had children. And that year she was gebenched with her first child. And her child needed her, and as a result, right before Ne'ilah, she had a leave shul. And before she left the Ezras Nashim, she turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and she said a tefillah. She said, Eibishter, you gave me such a beautiful matana this year. You gave me a child. I waited for this child for years and years and years. And finally this year, you benched me with a child. I have so much nachas from this child. I can't tell you how thankful and how grateful I am for this child that you give me. He says, Eibishter, I want to give you a bracha. I give you a bracha that you should give your kindlech a good gebenched yar, so that you'll be able to have nachas from your children the same way you gave me the nachas that I have from my child. And the Baal Shem Tov said that when this woman said that tefillah, everything that I couldn't be piled, all of a sudden she piled. And all the doors and the Chaimish Shal Barzel, everything came storming down. And the Baal Shem Tov said, I'm going to tell you why in Shemayim this woman's tefillah made such a roshem? He said because it wasn't just a tefillah. It was a tefillah that came mitoich haidah. It was a tefillah that came from a thank you Hashem. Hashem, thank you so much for giving me nachas. I appreciate it so much. And her bakash, her whole tefillah emanated from haidah. And when the tefillah emanates from haidah, it has an incredible koyach. So Rav Ernst was Moisef, he's softened the flaw. He said that somebody once asked the Belz Zeruv, Rabbi Yisroch mi bells. How come the Anshe Knesset Gdoilo, when they were misakin Shemona Esrei, they were not misakin a tefillah for good children? You have a tefillah for everything. Everything you want, it's Shemona Esrei brachas. A 19th was even instituted in Yavna. How come there's no tefillah for good children? So the Belz Zeruv said it's not true. There is. He said there is. He said, where is it? He said, we say in Moedim, Atohu l'dor v'dor, noida l'cha, u'nesaper tehilasecha. L'dor v'dor, noida l'cha, u'nesaper tehilasecha. We tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, l'dor v'dor, we should be zoicha, that our doiris will be nesaper tehilasecha. That's where we daven forget the kinder. But the Shoyal asks the Rebbe, he says, I don't understand. So why is it tucked away over here? You should make a whole bracha. We should have a whole bracha for Tfilas Habonim, right? People daven Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they're thinking about their children the whole day. So how come in Shemona Esrei, when you daven 3 times a day, Ba'boker, Ba'erev, B'tzarayim, how come you don't mention it? Why is there no bracha? So the Rebbe said, because this tefillah is so important that we were afraid that the Mekatrigim and all the Miniyas would go and they would get in the way of this bracha being able to play itself out. So we had to hide it. We had to tuck it away. So in the middle of Moedim, where the Satan already thinks, they're done with all the tefillahs. Now it's ready, okay, I can go to the side. We throw in and we say, because we don't even want the Satan, the Mekatrik, to know that this tefillah exists. That's why we throw it into Moedim. But Rav Ernst said, I'll pee this meisim with the Holy Baal Shem Tov. Maybe there's an oimek. Maybe you could say it with a different nusach. It's because this tefillah is so chashav. This is so important. This is the hemshech of the Yid. This is so critical that we want to say it mitoich haidah. In the middle of Moedim, we're giving haidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We throw in Eibishter. We're asking you, give your kindlech a git geben shtiyar. So like this, you could have nachas from them the way we have nachas from our children. And it's over here that we ask for our children. It's b'toich haidah. That's where this tefillah is. It could be the Leila Seder, which is a night of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which, as we've spoken at already so many times from the Lomdim, there's 2 dinim in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's to tell the story to be mechazek our amunah, but it's also to give shevach v'aidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a night when you're sitting around the table and all you're thinking about is shevach v'aidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When a person screams vanitzak, and when a person says a tefillah, and the tefillah emanates from a place of Moedim, it emanates from a place of l'dor v'dor nesaper tehilasecha. It emanates from a place of shevach v'aidah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That type of tefillah, like the tefillah of that Yidina in that story with the Holy Baal Shem Tov, that has an ability to be poil. That has an ability to go and be shover, break every mechitza that there is in Shamayim. Maybe a little bit of a knetch in terms of understanding the incredible skula of Van Nitzak.